Now we'll get into the subject of the evening. And what we like to do is we always like to start with a legend, related. This one is related. You may have to dig a little bit to figure out why and how, but related to the topic for the evening, which is how to prepare for the new year. And actually, when we finish talking about that, it's going to be how to prepare for any kind of new activity. But let's begin with the legend. Now, one of the most famous of all Hawaiian chiefs, when you talk about chiefs this evening, one of the most famous of all Hawaiian chiefs of this island of Hawaii was named Liloa. And I've got to give my traditional beginning, which I didn't do, which I'll do that now. Ikawa Kahiko, Mamua o Kapanakuke. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there was a chief of this island called Liloa. Now, it's interesting. Some writers, when they're writing about Hawaiian history and things like that, they like to give really specific dates. Like somebody's rule was between 1435 and 1510. It'd be real specific like that. That's all made up. The Hawaiians did not give names to years like we do. We give names to years. 1541 is a name, and it sets some particular year apart from all the others. Hawaiians would never do that. So no one knows before Captain Cook when anything really happened. What they do is they make an estimate, usually using a very, very old system of just completely arbitrary, 25 years per generation. And then they read the old chants and all the names in there, and then they try to guess how far back that had to be. But when they get real specific about the year, you know it's totally made up. Even though it's well known in Hawaiian chanting that you leave out the uninteresting people. So not everybody's in there. Okay? And sometimes they'll put the really interesting people in several times, okay, to make the chant longer. So the fact is we don't know. But we do know that we have some archaeological evidence also from this guy, so we know he was here. And there's a lot of stories about him. So he was very well loved. He was one of those famous chiefs who had a time of peace and prosperity for his people. He did a lot of good deeds for the people. There are no stories and no records of any kind, of any wars during his whole reign. And so the people really love that. Those are the most well-loved chiefs and the ones that rank really high in history, in the telling of stories because of that. But he also went all over the island. He had his home, a lot of people here on the island know where this is, up here on the northeast coast is one of the most beautiful valleys in the world. It's called White People. And this used to be the home of all the chiefs, the main big chiefs of this island, until the time of the story that we're talking about. So anyway, at Liloa's time, that's where he lived, in that valley. And it's a very rich valley, and black sand beach, and gorgeous stream and waterfalls and all kinds. So that's where he held court. Now, Hawaii in those days was ruled by an aristocracy. And they had very much a feudal system, surprisingly similar to the European feudal system. They didn't have all the metals, so they didn't have all of the knights in shining armor, and they didn't have horses, so they didn't have all that. But as far as the structure goes, it was definitely a feudal structure. And Liloa he could be called king under those terms, but he was termed the highest ranking ali'i. Ali'i is a term that either means chief or a member of the aristocracy. So he was the highest rank. He ruled the whole island. And even though his home was in Waipio, he would travel a lot. He'd go to different places. He'd check up on the other chiefs, because almost like counts and barons and things like that, they had a whole different levels of chiefs responsible for different aspects of the life on the island. So he'd visit them, and he'd take care of any quarrels that there were, and he would consecrate the heiau. Heiau is, it's usually translated as temple, so we'll just call it temple for the time being. And so he would either build them if they were needed, or consecrate an old one and rebuild it for ceremonies and things like that. That was part of his duties. So in his travels one time on the Hamakua coast, there's this gulch called Hawaiian. And when he was down in the gulch traveling there, came across a pool by a waterfall, and in the pool, bathing, was this really, really gorgeous young woman. And he had an immediate desire for her. But he was a good chief. So first he went down, introduced himself, talked to her. One of the things when Hawaiians are meeting each other, still today, they'll talk about their families and their friends and trying to establish some kind of connection. Well, through the conversation, it turns out that this woman was distantly related to Liloa himself, something like a distant cousin. However, she was part of a family that was so low rank and such humble circumstances that she was practically a commoner. But not quite a commoner. That made all the difference. So by mutual consent, they made love, and apparently had a wonderful time, because it was just after her period, and they both agreed that very probably she would have a child. And Liloa said, he honored her, he said, if it's a boy, when he's old enough, I want you to send him, old enough to travel, I want you to send him to my court. And just to make sure he's recognized, I'll give you these 3 tokens. And this is a theme that you run across over and over again. Not abundantly, but it's a theme that's repeated in many kinds of stories. But anyway, he left 3 tokens with the woman. Her name was Akahia Kuleana. And he had such enjoyment with her as well, because he didn't do this with every girl that he had an affair with. Okay, but her, he left these tokens for the child in case it was a boy. First thing he left was his malo. That means something like a loincloth. This is what the Hawaiian men wore in those days, and it was a very precious, very personal item of clothing. And the chiefs, the higher chiefs, the highest ranking chiefs, are the ones who had the most, we would call it, expensive and finely made malos. What that meant in practical terms, it was not only very finely, they weren't really woven, but they were like pounded together and made of bark. But this was the finest, softest, long-lasting bark. Because Hawaiians, they went swimming, and even if they were chiefs, they always went swimming naked, because their clothing would melt right off them if they took it into the water. But they had beautiful clothing. They had all kinds of dyes and patterns that they would stamp on them and things like that. The very best quality were reserved for the highest elite. And so that's what he had. And so he left that in there. One of the legends says that he went out in the fields and got some tea leaves and wore a tea leaf malo on his way back home, and that he was laughed at a lot. But anyway, he left his malo. The second thing he left, also the sign of a chief, was a very special kind of lei called a Niho Palawa. And this means a lei made of whale's tooth, hung on human hair. There were several kinds of variations of these. Some were very elaborate, some were simply the tooth of the whale hanging down, but they were so rare and precious that they were a rank of a very high chief. They had these aristocratic rankings. And so he left that with her. And the third thing depends on who's telling the story. So I'll mention both things since I'm telling it. In some stories, he left her a feather lei. And not so much a lei as a kind of a belt, actually. And this was extremely precious because you saw the feathers that were on the kahili a little earlier. These came from birds in the mountains, and they had special people who were bird catchers, and they'd catch the birds, and the best of the bird catchers would take maybe 2 feathers. There was one bird that had 2 yellow feathers, and they'd catch the bird, take those 2 feathers, and let it go, so it would grow more. And then some had a few red feathers, and it took a long time and thousands of birds to make something like a cloak or even a lei or a sash. So they were very, very precious. And he left that, if he left that. The other thing he might have left was a dagger called a palau. Now, that's the name palau refers to 2 different kinds of, one a dagger and one a knife. One a dagger used in war, and the same name is used for a kind of a knife that was used to cut off the tops of the taros for planting. Well, some people say that that's what he gave her, but he was a high chief. He was the big king. He ruled everybody, and he didn't have an awful lot of time to go planting taro. So the probability is that it was a dagger used in case of war. If it was. So it was either that or a feather. So anyway, that's what he left her. So then he goes back, and he has, at the court, he has several wives. And by one of the wives, by one of the higher ranking one, his eldest son was born named Hakau. And he didn't give any more thought to that adventure for quite a few years. Meanwhile, Umi is growing up. And finally, Umi gets old enough to travel. Now, people in the old days began doing things a lot younger than we're used to doing now. Matter of fact, it wasn't too long ago in Western civilization where people did things. A lot of people don't realize how can I put it, the trust we put in very young people a long time ago. And not so long ago in certain terms. There was a captain of a warship of the United States Navy during the Revolution who was 16 years old. And that was not considered unusual. He had the skills. You couldn't just be a captain because you came from a good family, especially not in the U.S. And so we used to entrust what we today call children with a lot more substantial responsibilities than we're used to now. So at that time, old enough to travel could have been 8 or 9 years old. Okay? We don't know for sure, but it certainly could have been that young. But when he was old enough, his mother took him aside, told him about his father, and gave him the tokens, and gave him a very special instructions of what to do when he got to court. So Umi takes the things, wraps them up in a tea leaf bundle, heads off for White People Valley. Now, when you say court, Hawaiians in those days lived in compounds. So it wasn't like it was a huge palace or a huge fortress or anything like that. It was a very big compound with separate huts for the wives, separate huts for eating. Men and women had separate huts. Huts for all kinds of different things. Huts for all the courtiers, who were the hangers-on, which, every big ruler has those kinds of people. Some of them had specific tasks that they were assigned, just like under the feudal system, and others were just, one of my teachers said, eating at the public trough. That's the way he described it. So Umi comes in. Now, there was lots of protocol. Some people try to recreate some of it today, but in those days, it was very strict protocol for practically everything you did. You had to follow a certain ritual sequence of activities. And Umi didn't, based on his mother's instructions, he didn't follow that protocol. Because if he had, he probably never would have gotten to his father. There would have been all kinds of people in the way who would have to decide whether that was in their best interest or not. So what Umi did was go around by the back door. He found a way into the compound that nobody was guarding. And he found a way to get right into the main large hut where Liloa was. And Liloa was in there. What they didn't have chairs. They would stack up mats. The best people lived had very nice soft mats made of the same material his mama was made out of. But so he was reclining in there. And Umi came right in, and he was. This is why we think he was probably fairly young, because he came right in and sat down on Liloa's lap. Well, talk about shock. And Loa himself stood up and threw this kid off and was about to call for the guards, and wise Umi had arranged things so that this package fell open in there with the tokens that Liloa had left that he recognized immediately. And so he acknowledged him as his son, and he became part of the court and grew up and learned all kinds of things, became very skilled, strong, handsome, all the things that Hawaiian heroes have to be. And so then, as he got older and older, and his half-brother, Hakau, also, the time came when Liloa got too old and was getting ready to die. So he called his two sons, and he called a great big public gathering of all the chiefs and the aristocracy, and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I named my eldest son, Hakau, as heir to my throne. He said that. I have to mention something here for Hawaiian culture. In the ancient times, and even under the monarchy, when there was an heir had to be specifically and publicly named. They had no right of succession by birth alone. Just because, and the heir did not have to be the eldest. The ruler could choose anyone to be his heir. It was usually some relative, didn't have to be a close relative, but it was usually a relative. But it could be anywhere along the line. It could be man or woman. There were a lot of very famous Hawaiian chiefesses. Awful word, but that's all we've got. But in this case, he did choose his eldest son. But what he did was split the rule. And he said, Umi will be the keeper of the god. Now, Hawaiians in those times had a lot of different gods, but usually the high chief would have one particular one, I think that he called his special one, and this would be represented by a figure. Now, sometimes a carved wood, sometimes a stone. In this particular case, it was a kind of a basket material covered with feathers, with a very fierce-looking head and flashing eyes of Babylonian and a mouth of shark's teeth. You got to understand, the god was invisible and could make himself visible if he wanted to. The object was only a symbol of the god. So they didn't really worship the object. When they did pass it around and people bowed down, they knew they were not bowing to the object. They were bowing to what it represented. It's almost in the same way as today we might salute the flag of our country. We're not worshiping the flag. We are honoring the country it represents. So this was the same kind of thing that they used to do in ancient Hawaii. So anyway, he put Umi in charge of that, which made Umi kind of like a high priest, because he was in charge of all the religious ceremonies and all the temples of the whole island. That was his, we call it kuleana, that was his responsibility. So things went along after Liloa died, but Hakau turned out to be a very cruel and a very despotic ruler, and grew to be very much hated by the chiefs as well as by the people. And finally it got so bad that Umi got together with some friends and some chiefs and the support of the commoners, and he overthrew Hakau. And I won't tell you what he did with him, that's kind of gory. But he overthrew Hakau, and he took over the whole leadership, and so he was the absolute ruler of the entire island. And after those battles that he had, and the war he won against Hakau, because it was not just like walking up one day and doing it, there was fighting went on. He was engaged in one more war. He had married one of his wives. He had 6 wives, Umi did. And all of these wives were very high-ranking in the aristocracy, so that his children would gain more rank than him. That's kind of how it worked. So he had all these high-ranking wives. One of them, his first wife, was Pi'ikea. And she had a brother, Kiha Pi'ilani, which is a very famous name on Maui. They were from Maui, the island. And so, again, they had a bad ruler there, and so on the urging of Umi's wife, he went to war with Maui, overthrew the high chief there, and put Kiha in his place, and then he came back home. And those are the only 2 wars we know of that Umi had throughout the rest of his life. Then he became a very peace-loving man and promoting the welfare of his people. So a very famous chief because of that. One of the unusual things I have to mention about Umi that started a tradition, a different tradition. All the chiefs up to that time had their place, their court in Waipio. Nobody knows for sure why, but Umi moved the entire court out of Waipio Valley and up into the mountains to a place that today is called Ahu'aumi, which was again a place of many compounds in the plateau between Mauna Loa and Hualalai. You can go up there today and you can find the ruins of this compound, but it's really a desolate place. Probably it was well forested, they had more water, and it was a very fertile place when Umi did that. Because it's nothing like that now, probably due to some lava flows. But he moved the whole court, and that's where he held court. This was part of Hawaiians divided up their islands into something called Ahupua'a. Literally that means pig pile, but that has a complicated history. What it actually was a more or less pie-shaped section of land, we might call it a district, that had the broadest base at the ocean, up to the reefs, and went inland up to some peak or another. The idea behind this was that there would be a chief in charge of that district. The idea behind it was that that district would have most of what it needed to be self-sufficient. Not everything, because there was trade between these but most of what it needed in terms of food it would be pretty self-sufficient. And so they went from the sea to the mountains, and this place that Umi had was right at the top of the district called Keaho, where now there's a beautiful resort hotel on the beach and lots of temple sites and things like that down there. And this was at the top of that area. And so Umi became this very beloved chief, partly because he was almost a commoner, who mostly by his own efforts became the ruler of the whole island. And because he was one of those chiefs who had a time of peace and prosperity for all the people. And that's the story of Umi. Iholo ke ka'au, which means, so runs the story. Now, with all of that told, let's get to the theme and the topic that we were talking about. How do you prepare for the new year? There was lots of things in this story about preparation for the future. And so that's the theme we're taking into what we're talking now. So I'm going to give you some guidelines. And these will work for, like I said, for the new year or for any new cycle of activity. These are ideas, these are suggestions, time-tested, they really do work. And so let's look at them. First thing, when you're getting ready to do this, getting ready for some kind of new cycle, stop and think. What do you think about? Well, first of all, you forget about the past when you're doing this. You forget about the future. You don't think about what you don't have. You don't think about what you need. You forget about resolutions. Those are one of the biggest wastes of time. Although, I have to insert something here. I saw a cartoon today. It's the only time I've ever seen a practical use of resolutions. The guy who made all these incredible resolutions. I'm going to cut out sweets from my life. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to learn how to play the piano. And his friend was saying, wow, those are pretty heavy-duty resolutions. He says, do you think you can accomplish them all? He said, no. But he says, if I make them high enough, nobody will be able to fault me for not making them, for not doing them. Okay, all right. But other than that, there's really not. It's good to have it, but we need to do something deeper, more strong than simply a resolution to do something. So, the most important thing to do for this first thing, when you put all this other stuff aside, and it sounds so simple, but you'd be amazed how many people don't do it. Decide what you really want. Now remember, you're not thinking about the means. What stops an awful lot of people right there is, well, I want this, but I don't have the money, or I don't have the skills, or I don't have the knowledge, or I don't have the friends, or you've got to forget all of that at this first step. And just decide what you really want. Second thing is, look at yourself. Now, please be careful, because I was giving the same thing today in a virtual world, the same class, and I had somebody instantly leave because they really didn't like to hear this next part. All right, look at yourself. What do you have to change about yourself to get what you want? Very often people don't think about that at all. They think about what they want and they start making moves toward it, but what you are right now, the habits you have, the ways of thinking you have, the knowledge you have, the physical strength or whatever that you have is giving you what you have. If you want something different in life, you have to make yourself different. Now, you can do this haphazardly, which is what most people do. They make changes as necessary while they're moving toward what they want. Okay? or you can do it much more efficiently and sit and think about it, and look at yourself, and this is what I want. What do I have to do to be able to have that? Not what you have to change in the world, folks. You don't have an awful lot of control over that. But I'm going to give you a little Huna secret here. When you begin changing yourself, the world around you changes in response. It's one of the most incredible things ever. People will change if you change. Now, it's not one-to-one. It's not 100% every time exactly what you'd like. But there will be a response and a difference. And what happens in the world then becomes feedback for you to decide, do I need to make some other changes? Is there anything else? Where this comes out most strongly is where somebody decides what they really want is a great relationship. And I've worked with a lot of people who make long lists of all the qualities they want in this new person who they want to come into their life. And so I ask them, and again, I either get blank stares or panic when I say, what kind of person would that kind of person want to be with? Oh, they very seldom think of that. And yet, like we're talking about right now, that's critical. If you want to attract or be with someone with the qualities that you have, you've got to have qualities that would attract that person. And the same too, whether it's going to be a job, or whether it's going to be a different position, or whether it's going to travel, or whatever you want to do, there's going to be some changes that you'll have to make. And I'm recommending that you make them consciously. Save a lot of time and trouble, and it's much more efficient. And there'll be other things that you'll have to change too as you go along, because conditions change. But the sooner you can start thinking of that, planning for it, the easier it's going to be. Listen. Now we can stop, look, listen. Okay. Listen to the world. Now, what does this mean? This world around you is so full of information. Once you've decided what you want, this world is full of information on how to get it. It's all over the place. Books, newspapers, conversations, television programs, movies. There's all kinds of stuff that comes up that will give you clues that you can use in moving toward what you want. I read an awful lot of novels. My favorites are science fiction and fantasy. And some of those writers have such great little statements that are so useful that you can apply in your life. They throw them here in once in a while. I just recently read one book, and there's a young boy who's terribly injured. And I'm got to make it real simple. While he's injured, he retreats in his mind, and he gets in touch with the spirit of a dragon. And this is a dragon with all kinds of knowledge. And so the dragon says, you have to get yourself ready to think what you want and start doing something to get it. And the kid says, okay. And so he says, first of all, I've got to withdraw from this pain because that's getting in my way and it's distracting. And so I'm going to close my mind off to that. And he starts doing that. And the dragon says to him, you idiot, what do you think you're doing? The dragon says, I can't believe this. You human beings don't even know how your own bodies work. He says, no wonder you're so short-lived. He said, relax, be aware of your body. The pain is a message telling you what needs fixing and where, and tell the parts of your body that know how to do it to fix it. The dragon says, anybody with any smarts knows that. That's really some terrific advice. Because I can tell you from the Huna knowledge and the way the old Hawaiians used to heal, that's what works. Right? So anyway, there's a world of information out there. Listen to it, look at things in terms of how can that help me get what I want. You can look at it in any other way you want to also, but with this is very, very important to you, take a look at things in those terms as well. After you've stopped, looked, and listened, act. Do something. Do something to start changing your life. Now, here's another little secret. The Chinese knew this. They said, if you want changes in your life, there's an old Chinese proverb, if you want changes in your life, change 27 things in your house. Most of us in the West would think, what's that got to do with going toward what I want to accomplish? It changes things. When you change something in your house, when you rearrange the furniture, when you clean out your drawers, when you give away old clothes, when you make changes, even in your own environment, this has ripple effects. First, inside you. It starts opening up your mind to new things, new ideas, new ways of looking at things. It reaches out and connects with the people around you and influences them as well to get ready for something new and something different. So act. You can always act. You can change your routines. Change some of your habits. You don't have to get rid of them all, but you can change some things. But when you begin changing things, you begin to change and your world begins to change. And new opportunities come in, even when it doesn't seem directly related at all. Aloha is one of the most important parts of Hawaiian culture, and so one of the things we talk about is to bless. To bless means to acknowledge, to appreciate, to praise. It can also mean to help. A hug can be a blessing. A gift can be a blessing. So what you do is you bless anything, especially. The more you bless in any way at all, it's good for you. But it helps to heal your mind and body and spirit. But if you bless things related to what you want, this means not only bless the things, but bless the people who have them. One of my favorite stories was about a black man who used to be a child evangelist on the radio, grew up, went into the military service, came back, dead poor, and but with some really great ideas and knowledge. And so what he started doing, he came back, he passed by a restaurant where you could see all the people inside in rich clothing and having delicious meals. And would he get mad? Not at all. He would look at that and he'd say, like he was talking to God or talking to the universe, he said, that's for me. He'd walk down the street and see this beautiful big car, that's for me. Which is a blessing. It's an appreciation, an admiration, a recognition of something good. And every time you see somebody doing something or see something that he wanted in his life, he ended up with this is true, he ended up with a gold-plated church in New York. And which he taught people how to manifest love and health and beauty and wonder and wealth in their lives. And that was what he devoted his life to. Fantastic. And that's how he started, with blessing. A different way of doing it, but that's what he did. Related to the things that he wanted to have, or be, or do in his life. So this requires looking at the world, and when somebody else has something which is like something you want to have, praise them. Say, wow, good for you. Because your own body and your subconscious is hearing that and taking that personally. And that's going to get you closer. And that's going to get you closer. And that's going to get you closer. Now, next is trust. What are you going to trust? Trust, here's the thing. You trust that there's always a solution to any problem. And you trust that there's always material or spiritual or even mental help when you need it. I see a lot of people don't get it when they want it, or they start to get depressed, or they start to go into negative thinking. But here's something about this. It's just as easy to decide that there is a solution or help available as it is to decide there isn't. But when you decide there isn't, you block your awareness of it. You won't even see it. When you decide there is, you're going to start looking at different things differently. Other things are going to start catching your attention. And we'll get a little spiritual here. There is a spiritual part of you that will inspire you, channeling from the source of the universe, that will channel information to you, but it doesn't always channel it to you directly, because often when we get stressed, we're closed off. When it can't channel directly, it'll channel indirectly. And one of the favorite ways it has of channeling indirectly, well, how many people here, let's just have it, how many people here have ever been in need of advice or counseling or ideas, and you walked into a bookstore and a book practically fell on you or into your lap? How many people have had that? In every group, it's a big percentage, more than half. So your spiritual self loves books. That's clear. Okay. What it means is we give authority to books. So that spiritual part in trying to reach you will reach you through some source of authority. Some people get this when they turn the radio on. Some people get it when they turn on the TV. Some people get it from a lot. I've gotten it from billboard signs. And I really need some advice. Bam. Okay. It's there, always. But we have to be ready and willing to let it in. And so by trusting that it's there, it opens up far, far more connections than you get otherwise. Because it is there. It's a big world. It's an infinite place. And finally, this takes a little practice for some people, but it's really worthwhile. Expect things to work out. You don't know how. That's not important. You can't possibly know all the ways in which things can work out. Like I said, it's an infinite universe. Incredible things can happen. Expect things to work out, but be flexible as to how that happens, is the idea. Okay? We have a saying, we call it, everything's working out perfectly. We use the initials and turn it into a noun and a verb. So when you don't know what to do, EWAP it. It means everything's working out perfectly. Okay? And, so we say everything's working out perfectly, but maybe differently. And if you can accept that, then you're going to be more flexible and be able to take advantage of opportunities that may not seem like opportunities at first. Make a plan to accomplish what you want, but be ready to change the plan when it isn't working. You got to tell people over and over again, there's nothing sacred about a plan. It's only a tool. And if that tool isn't working, put that one aside and make a new one. Okay? You only use a plan as long as it's working. And that's what it's for. And here's finally, never give up. But feel free to change your mind about how important it is. Okay? Reserve that choice. That isn't giving up when you do that. You can just say, I don't think this is worth the time, the effort, the energy. I don't want to do this anymore. Fine, that's not giving up. That's making a choice to go in a different direction. It has a big effect on your own self-esteem and your self-confidence. So give yourself permission to do that. So those are the ideas that I want to share with you about preparing for the new year or preparing for anything do that you want to do and achieve. Pi'iholo, keika'au. So goes the story.